Hello friends, so today's video is going to be a list of some of my favorite stories that I picked up in the months of October and November. For the rest of this year, I have done the top 10 for each of the quarters, and then this time around I'm actually going to only mention 4 stories because one, as the year is wrapping up, I'm definitely slowing down my reading, just kind of preparing for the new year, but then also it's just 2 months rather than filling in with December as well, so we're just looking at October and November, and I'm surprised because my favorites have been so different from a lot of what I usually pick up. For a lot of the rest of this year, I've been really enjoying some of the epic fantasy I've been reading, such as Engines of Empire, and then I also really enjoyed things like Justice of Kings, The Art of Prophecy, but these ones, it's pretty much all about the sweetness, the cozy factor. I don't know if it's just fitting with the season or what, but either way, jumping into it, the first one, I have mentioned this quite a bit recently, would be Hat Atelier. So this is a manga series with some of the most unbelievably beautiful artwork. I really cannot emphasize enough how beautiful this art is, how magical, how it does have this coziness to it, but it's also, there's just so much skill, clearly so much skill in being able to create art at this level, panel after panel, and sometimes I would just sort of forget to be reading the story and I would just kind of get lost in the artwork, so that alone made it incredibly engaging and charming. But the story itself is really sweet, and there's definitely little sprinkles of darkness throughout that make it compelling, make you want to turn the page. There's this sense of mystery. So we follow this young girl named Coco in this fantasy world where magic exists, but from what she understands, you have to be born with this ability to be able to use magic, and that's an ability she does not have. One day, a witch comes through her where she lives, and they use some magic, and she witnesses how they use their magic, and it makes her believe, maybe I do have a chance at being able to use magic. Maybe there is something I can do to learn. And her pursuit, her curiosity, leads to something quite devastating happening, but then results in her being able to pursue this curiosity that she has about magic. And like I said, there are these sprinkles throughout of something darker, something more sinister, something going on behind the scenes that you only get here and there as you're progressing through the story. There's also a mentor-mentee relationship that I've really been enjoying. I've really been enjoying the way that Coco interacts with some of the other characters that show up, each of their individual struggles that they're trying to overcome, the way that they have to support each other, the way they push each other. I've just been loving it so much. I can't wait to read more of this story. Next up is a book that very much caught me off guard. It was a new release that I've yet to have a chance to talk about. So the book would be If You Could See the Sun. So this is barely fantasy. It's not really fantasy. It's a contemporary story. It takes place in our world. There's just one magical component. And I will say that if you cannot get past how easily everybody else gets past this magical component, then you're not going to like this book. But you just kind of have to accept that this is a thing that happens, and that thing would be our main character, who is somebody who's going to school. She's from a not as wealthy family as everybody else at this prestigious school she goes to. She randomly one day turns invisible. She doesn't know how it's happening, and she doesn't know how to force it to happen. She has no idea what the origin of this is, but it happens, and then it starts to keep happening. And she also, shortly before turning invisible, finds out that her family is not going to be able to afford continuing the cost of the school, so she'll probably have to transfer. And she knows her parents have sacrificed so much for her, not just with her ability to go to this school, but just their entire lives. They've given up so much for her. And so she doesn't want to make them feel bad for her no longer being able to go to this school past this particular year, but then at the same time, she really wants to continue her education. She's the brightest mind, aside from her academic rival, who is right there neck and neck with her. But she is an incredibly bright mind, and a lot of the story is kind of commentary on class and opportunity and the fact that you can be the best and the brightest, but if you don't have the money to go along with that, you're going to face a lot of obstacles. And the way that those themes were handled, I thought was really well done. This is a young adult story, and so some of it, I thought that the way that the humor was done was quite amusing. I actually really liked the humor in the story, but I do feel like the themes hit deep, and some of the backstory for her parents in particular and their time trying to live in America was actually really devastating. So I really enjoyed the story. The fantasy element, the whole turning invisible. So she turns invisible temporarily, and then she'll come back into existence. She can usually tell when she's about to turn invisible because she gets this feeling, this kind of coldness running through her. And so she decides, I'm going to capitalize on my ability to turn invisible by having my academic rival partner with me in creating this app where people can anonymously submit some, basically like they're looking for a private investigator to get them information. They'll pay whatever they have to pay to get this information. She's like, I can turn invisible. I can get whatever information I need. And that setup, like I said, you just got to run with it. You just got to go with it. You're not going to get tons of explanation as to how people are finding the app, how the app works, and the whole invisibility factor. But for me, that was so not the point of the story. And it was so clearly just let's see what would happen if this girl had this ability. And also the questions that arise of, morally, is this wrong? Where's the sense of privacy? What lines are we crossing? How often do these people with so much money never even have to consider crossing lines because doors open for them? No matter their character, no matter their principles, they just have access, and the desperation that comes with being poor or being a lower status. So I really liked the commentary. I really liked the themes. I thought that the humor was quite funny. And I have to say, even though the romantic relationship was clearly not the focus, I actually quite liked the relationship as well between the main character and the love interest in the story. I thought it was fun. I really liked this book. I don't know how many of you would also really like this book because it's not the typical fantasy story, but I really, really liked it. Next up would be A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking. The fact that T. Kingfisher had been in 2 different favorites of the year from this year has solidified that she's one of my new favorite authors. I want to read everything she's written. The nice thing is, I've said this a couple times, if you read something by T. Kingfisher and you don't love it, pick something else up because she's a chameleon. She writes such drastically different stories from book to book, and she also plays around with different genres. So I read What Moves the Dead, which is fantasy horror. It's a retelling of the fall of the House of Usher. The Seventh Bride, which is more of a fairy tale type of story with hints of grimness to it. And then definitely leaning into grim fairy tale would be Nettle and Bone, which is the other one that I adored. I loved that book. I also read Paladin's Grace, which is a fantasy romance featuring actual adults who have some adult problems in life, and it was very funny and very amusing and ridiculous, as T. Kingfisher tends to have in every single book I've read. And A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking was just her at her silliest and her most charming. We follow a young girl who is only 14 years old, who, it does not sound charming. The opening is that she goes into her family's bakery to start working for the day, and there's a dead body on the ground, and she's just flipping out like, oh my gosh, there's a body. And then she doesn't really know what to do, and you just sit with her as she's spiraling through the fact that there's a dead body in their bakery, and she starts to hyper-focus on completely irrelevant information. And then from there, people start to wonder if she had a role in this person's murder. They believe it was a murder. They wonder because she is a wizard. She uses her magic to help her in the bakery. That's really the only area that she is gifted in when it comes to magic. The magic's interesting because it's very, very hyper-specific. So hers has to do primarily with dough. And then you see other magicians, other wizards throughout their town, throughout their city, who have other very, very specific magic. And it's hinted at throughout the beginning of the story that other places do not accept wizards, and it seems like some of that lack of acceptance is seeping its way into her city, and that plays a role in people wondering if it's her. But then there's also this mystery of, are wizards being hunted? Are wizards being framed? Are they being set up to look like they are a danger to the rest of society? And now this 14-year-old girl is thrust into this plot that ends up entangling her with city guards, with the Duchess, with a potential military threat, and all the while she's just trying to be a 14-year-old girl working in a bakery who loves dough. And it's great. I described it as feeling somewhat like Shrek in its tone, where it is young adult, but there's a lot of humor that I think is going to be very appealing and fun for a lot of adults as well. Absolutely loved this one. I think Nettle and Bone still might have been more my taste, but I think A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking is a little bit more, it has more of a mass appeal where it can be enjoyed by a lot of different. The last book for today, because there's only 4, would be, and I've mentioned this one a lot since I picked it up, would be The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. I started with Witch Hat Atelier, ending with another witch story. This one is a contemporary fantasy, and we follow this young woman who is a witch living in our own world in present day, but witches are hidden in society. They don't make it known that they exist. And one day she has the opportunity to become essentially a teacher to these 3 young orphaned witches. And she accepts this opportunity, and in doing so, she's not only getting to know these little girls who have had very isolated lives and who have been very lonely for a lot of their lives and don't know if they can ever see themselves finding a place in society because of their magical abilities they have to keep hidden, and they don't know how to do this. Beyond just seeing that with these little girls, you also see our main character dealing with her own issues of abandonment, of feeling isolated, of feeling like she doesn't have a place to call home. And then you get into some of the other characters and their backstories. There's also a really sweet love story in the book. It was just very cozy, very sweet, very adorable. I will say that these 4 books have all been, like I said, very fitting of the season, but definitely the kind that kind of fill you up with happiness. The beginning of the year, it hit with all the epic fantasy, it hit with the action, it hit with the intense world building, and then we're kind of easing into the end of the year with these warm fuzzies. There's one additional book I wanted to mention. I mentioned it in a recent wrap-up, but I hadn't yet finished it, and I still haven't finished it. But I have been kind of taking a break from reading, and I do want to come back to it, refresh myself, because it's very complex with its politics, and that would be The Goblin Emperor. I do think that it would have made this list had I finished it in time, because it is political fantasy to the nth degree. It's everything I could want from political fantasy. That said, it is kind of dry and very moment by moment, just following this character around as they're dealing with some interesting threats or the potential of threats, or trying to determine if the way that somebody is speaking to them is considered a great offense, how they're supposed to speak to other people, because the setup for the story is that this individual who never expected to be the emperor has had every single person in line before them die in some kind of an accident, whether that accident had a possibility of not actually being an accident or not. It doesn't matter at this exact moment. What matters is that our main character, Maya, is now suddenly thrust into a position of power, and he is trying to navigate that. So I've really been enjoying this one. I am excited to get back to it because I definitely need to, but very different from the other 4 that I mentioned. Regardless, if you have read any of these, let me know your thoughts on them. Let me know what have been some end of the year favorites for you. And I am really excited to be kind of wrapping up the year, picking up a few more things, and then reflecting back on all of my favorites of the year, all the most surprising, maybe some that I thought I would love but didn't end up loving. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.